This is the Discussions in Body Art podcast, where health inspectors and other regulators, body art facility owners and managers, practitioners, and others can hear concise information that's useful and free of judgment for body art safety and regulatory related topics. If you're interested in bite-sized body art information, I welcome you. My name is John Johnson, and I'm your host. Please see Session 0 for disclaimers. It's not uncommon for health inspectors and other regulators to ask how we learn to perform body art, how and where we receive our training. Not to say they aren't aware of apprenticeships, but very few health codes have apprenticeship requirements, so it's not something many inspectors really need to know much about since they don't usually regulate or inspect our training. This means most authorities, like regulators, including facility inspectors, likely have little knowledge of what the body art learning process is really like. This podcast session isn't about apprenticing in body art, it's about what's missing when someone has completed an apprenticeship and is released into the industry to earn a living. Let me say now that I spoke to some body art professionals I've known and respected for a very long time when composing this session, and I'd like to give them credit now, in no particular order: Beth Rasumsky, Jeff Saunders, Stephen DeToma, Mick Rawls, Brian Thomas, Billy Wood, Tiffany Mitchell-Garcia, Brian Ragusin, and Ryan Roulette. If you know a practitioner currently mentoring someone in body art, this might be a good podcast session to forward to them. Environmental health professionals go through regulated and formal education and training, and receive continued education throughout their careers. It's my opinion that not all, but a lot of body artists either don't know much or anything about continued education opportunities other than their annual required bloodborne pathogen standard training for those of us in the United States. But continued education is not usually emphasized when would-be body artists are in training. Many don't consider how they might expand their knowledge and skill sets once they're working in the field as professionals. Continued education has its own podcast session, so I won't spend too much more time on it in this one. But here's a list of resources studio owners and regulators should be aware of because they can be useful for current body art practitioners. The Association of Professional Piercers, the Fakir Mushafar Foundation, the Alliance of Professional Tattooists, the Society of Permanent Cosmetic Professionals, the American Academy of Micropigmentation, and there's a few tattoo conventions that offer seminars that might be related to safety, and many piercing and tattoo educational conferences around the world each year. Now, once a new practitioner starts working in body art professionally, the rate at which they're exposed to new information and concepts mostly slows down, I think. Once officially free from their mentor, new body art professionals may really only be exposed to their immediate coworkers, maybe a few other colleagues with experience to learn from, and possibly social media. That is, if they're not intentionally seeking sources of formal continued education like the ones I mentioned, and considering social media a reliable source comes with some risk. I should also add that a quick search for body piercing, tattoo, microblading, and permanent cosmetic schools will give you a lot of results that mostly would not be considered legitimate or valuable in the eyes of seasoned professionals. Low-cost companies selling people on the promise of exciting and lucrative careers in body art aren't offering much more than crash courses in snake oil. Short training programs couldn't possibly prepare anyone to adequately work in a body art studio without a proper apprenticeship. This is especially true if the course is exclusively online. I entered the body piercing industry in 1998 and have worked with a lot of piercers and tattooers. My closest industry friends and other peers seem to share the opinion that many people entering the body art industry these days aren't receiving, or at least completing, thorough apprenticeships. The consequence is that they look for work in our studios and at the same time don't have much experience with or grasp of a lot of things we consider basic or fundamental. Or perhaps they find jobs in studios working at a level below what we might consider modern in regards to technology and infection prevention, where continued education is a low priority. To be fair, apprenticing is mostly unregulated throughout the U.S., so who's to say what requirements must be met to consider this period of study complete in areas that are unregulated in this regard? What qualifies someone to mentor other people? I don't have the answer to these questions, but I'd love to be a part of the team that works it out. Until then, I'm only aware of a couple states with apprenticeship requirements, and the APP's suggested guidelines are at safepiercing.org. The inspiration for this session was the multiple conversations I've been having with colleagues over the last year or more who experience the same thing I do. Many new piercers don't do and never had much or any training during their apprenticeships with genital piercings. Some would like to learn and tell me their mentor didn't offer them, so it was never an option during their apprenticeship. But some have absolutely no interest. Once upon a time, maybe a long time ago, being a piercer, as I remember it, meant you offered genital piercings. And I'm not exaggerating. I've discussed this with more of my peers than I can count, and we've all encountered this a lot in recent years. Using genital piercings as an example of apprenticeship shortcomings may sound a bit extreme if you think of genitals as being taboo. But for piercers who've been around for a while, it's totally normal. And it's really not just genitals. There's piercers who don't offer other types of piercings that they should have become proficient in during an apprenticeship, but almost seem proud to have never learned anything about. I think it's completely okay for a piercer or studio to not offer specific services, but I do think these decisions should be made using logic, and logic is the name of the game for body art decision making. Apprentices need to place their trust in their mentor and hopefully select a mentor they aspire to be like. So it's easy for a new apprentice to believe their mentor knows everything and has all the answers. A mentor's duty should not be to train someone to repeat a series of steps. They should teach their apprentices to think like skilled professionals in whichever body art field they work in. This includes thinking of all learning opportunities, but a mentor may also want to limit the flow of information to their new apprentice. Too much information from a lot of different sources will eventually conflict and may be confusing. I think a great apprenticeship starts with the most basic information and skills and allows one skill to build on the others as the apprentice cultivates their body art IQ one step at a time. As they progress, alternative techniques, information, and concepts can be introduced and studied. A lot of times, apprentices take on their new position in a studio and get right to work. In only days, maybe weeks, they begin performing procedures on clients willing to be test subjects. I think this is mostly premature. I think the act of performing body art should only happen when the apprentice has firm comprehension of all aspects of the art regarding the work they're doing at a specific time. Piercings can easily result in scars. Maybe we shouldn't be piercing if we don't understand what causes scars and what the solutions are. Should they be installing body jewelry if they don't grasp jewelry qualities, both materials and craftsmanship? With the lack of troubleshooting skills and inability to understand how jewelry interacts with clients' anatomical features that I see with newer piercers, I'm of the opinion, at least in body piercing, many apprentices really just started piercing too soon. They end up missing out on much of the information I consider textbook stuff. It may not be until they work in a different studio, maybe a more advanced or maybe more modernized studio, that they figure out there was a lot missing from their apprenticeship. This is the halfway point for this session. I do appreciate you listening, and I hope you subscribe on whatever platform you use for podcasting. If you're a Patreon user, you'll find the remainder of this session and a lot more of my podcast content when you subscribe there. Thanks for listening to this session. I hope you found it useful. Please email questions, comments, and suggestions to john@newflowerstudio.com. Find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/JohnJ562. If you find my content valuable, you can help me out by suggesting this podcast to your colleagues. Subscribe on Patreon for exclusive content and visit newflowerstudio.com www.apprenticeships.org/NFW/podcast to learn more.